like just yesterday, Mike. We were talking about the opening weekend of Barbie. What a difference a couple of weeks makes. $1 billion here, $1 billion there.
Yeah, hold the phone a little bit. So, again, setting the stage for everybody out there in listener land.
In TV land?
No, TV land is what I was going to get to. Paul, how many appearances on screen have you had over the last 2 weeks?
Oh, a lot. But being with you on here is way better than all those, I just have to say. But it has been a whirlwind. Thank you, Barbenheimer. I have gotten no sleep. Mike can see me. You listening can't. I look like I just put my finger in a light socket. I'm half asleep. I was up at 2 a.m. doing a CNN hit on Monday morning that went live at 2:50 a.m. Same day, I went over to NBC News, did a couple of live segments there. And I owe it all to Barbenheimer because this is the biggest story out there, Mike, as you know, but also the strikes. So the actor and writer strike. And so it's the most tumultuous, maybe the most interesting time in our industry.
I think there you go. I used the Dickens quote a few weeks ago, and that it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And
there you go, a tale of two cities.
Yeah, and we truly are a tale of two cities right now. On one hand, you look at the box office, and I was talking to one of the major circuits this week, and they couldn't believe it. They were just, this is a recovery from, I looked at it, Paul, we did, what was it? 177 million.
176.4.
Okay.
Yeah. 176 million.
Let's back up to the summer of 2020. And this weekend was, I believe it was about $1.5 million in total.
Wait, for what?
Same weekend. So, in the same weekend in 2020 was 1.5 million in total. So and
it was drive-ins, my friend, drive-ins.
So we were 100 times better than where we were in the middle of the pandemic. And if everybody recalls, in the middle of the pandemic, when streaming was the new kid on the block, every analyst, everyone you talk to was theatrical is dead. It will not come back.
Mike. Not everybody. You and I, we were steadfast.
No, we were absolutely steadfast. But if you were reading any reports, financial analysts, everybody just said, it's going to change. It's not coming back. People are now used to watching at their homes. And
Mike, wasn't it like people were rooting for it?
They were.
There was this weird, jumping on the bandwagon of, ding dong, the witch is dead. We're so glad that not to compare the movie theaters to a witch, but I'm just saying, people were tap dancing on the grave of the poor movie theater that were going through this terrible time. But we knew it would come back, and look at with Barbenheimer where we are right now.
That's what I was.
And the other films.
That's what I wanted to get to. And during the summer, I had numerous calls with financial analysts who were looking at the sector, and all of them had the same. The same take. And the same take was, there's no way this industry can come back. What's the best it can do? And, my theme to them was the same. And that was, streaming is nice and it is added content in the home, but you cannot have the communal experience you have in a movie theater. And, I go back to this, Paul. We talked about this. This was, I think, a topic on our first podcast, and that was name one streaming movie, not a TV show, but a movie that somehow transcended, into the zeitgeist and became that must thing do. Is there one?
And there wasn't.
There hasn't been. There hasn't been.
No. And you know what, Mike? Parasite, if that had gone straight to streaming, if let's say Crazy Rich Asians, who had the opportunity to go to, I believe it was Netflix for a ton of money, those movies would have been a blip on the radar in the middle of a giant ecosystem of streaming that would have had no impact culturally. And I would argue, and I agree with you, that Barbenheimer, had those two movies open on streaming, Oppenheimer and Barbie, on the same day, would we be talking right now about $1.5 billion in box office, $1.6 billion between those two movies in a cultural phenomenon like no other? Would we be talking about that?
And the answer is no, because, when you look at, let's take Barbie just as so Barbie now is at, after today's gross, and we're recording on Tuesday. So the Monday gross is in they're around $468 million. So by the time we get to the weekend, they're going to be cruising past $500 million of box office. There are domestically. Yep. And what is it? Oh, it's well over $1 billion now.
It's $1,034,000,000 through Monday. It'll, I mean, by the end of this weekend, it's just going to be, $1.2 billion,
right?
$3 billion.
The interesting thing here is how many of those people have now seen the movie multiple times. And then the other thing that we saw starting an opening weekend, and it continues, and that is people going in groups, people dressing in pink, going to, in groups, people enjoying the communal experience of seeing the movie together. Something that happens in a movie theater that doesn't happen in streaming at home, doesn't happen if you're watching it on your iPad. It only happens when you're in a movie theater. And
absolutely,
I always say the same thing. It's like, there's no way to really kind of quantify what that adds to the IP. But what we saw through the pandemic, and again, kind of beating a dead horse, but I think it's important to say right now, and that is that the theatrical viewing of the film, or the theatrical distribution, elevates the IP for all the ancillaries down the road. And all the studios now have seen it. They tried every distribution pattern, that they could think of over the pandemic and leading up to, the last couple of years. And they all came to the same conclusion. And that is, wow, if we do something theatrically, it actually elevates it and makes more people want to stream it on our platform. And that absolutely, is, what a shock. We're going to go back to the original idea here.
No, I know. And look what's happened with streaming. Talk about headwinds and a challenge for theatrical with the pandemic. The streaming services got a thumb on the scale like no other to enhance their business because, hey, what's the game in town? Well, you can't even go to a freaking restaurant. What are you going to do? You're going to stay at home and drink and watch a movie on streaming. You have very few options outside of the home, including sporting events. So given all of those tailwinds for streaming, I always talk about headwinds and tailwinds. I got to find a new analogy for that. But it's just, it's incredible how far the movie industry was pushed down. By movie industry, I mean theatrical, movie theater exhibition. And how far streaming has had to come in terms of equalizing itself and finding its place. And the movie theater is definitive. And there's nothing like it, Mike. And I just think that given the challenges that the theaters faced, and now we have other challenges that are not related to the pandemic, but it's just astounding. And I think that we always talk about naysayers, Mike. How can you be a naysayer after Barbie and Oppenheimer about the movie theater?
Well, you can't. And here's an interesting thing, and that is I saw Mission Impossible this week in a movie theater. And
I think your dog really enjoyed the
time
movie
out,
too, Mike. It's all good. We
hold on. Hold on.
And now, with a little break for the dog silencing Mike Polidores. I love it when dogs bark during this stuff. I would have let the dog keep barking, Thaddeus, because I like that kind of thing. I love dogs, the best of anyone, and any humans too. Dogs are the best. Mike's almost back. Thanks for bearing with us. That bark break.
All right, let's pick it up. Thaddeus.
Hey, Mike, what's your dog's name?
Sasha.
That bark break brought to you by Sasha.
All right, Thaddeus, let's pick it up.
I already told
Okay.
Thaddeus. I was singing to Thaddeus. I gave him the whole scoop. I told him what happened. You can leave this all in if you want, Thaddeus. I'm only kidding.
So,
okay, let's continue.
So, I just wanted to say, following up on that theme, I saw Mission Impossible in a theater this week. And, here we are, week 4 of the film.
And with another bark break, Sasha, Mike Polydorus' dog. Too funny.
You know what's amazing is,
Mike, I don't think Sasha likes Mission Impossible.
I was going to say, what's amazing is, out of all the podcasts, that's the first time that's happened.
I've had it happen. Well, wait, because if right now, if a UPS driver or somebody came to the door and we're dog sitting another dog who's a real yapper.
Yep.
If somebody came to the door right now, it'd be like, a four alarm fire or whatever. They would be going nuts. So anyway, Mike, you were saying about Mission Impossible that you saw in a theater.
I saw Mission Impossible this week in a theater, and here we are, week 4 of the film. And what really was interesting, when the movie ended, and the theater was probably half full, there was applause. And, I kind of looked around and I was like, wow. And it was coming from more than one set of audience members. And it made me realize just how impactful, again, watching a movie in a theater really is. And that whole experience of, again, communal, you're there with strangers, but you're all enjoying. The funny parts are everyone's laughing together. They're enjoying the film. It just, there's something special about that.
Why did people think that was going to go away? I mean, it's not the pay telephone, right? That we get why that went away, but I think this whole idea, and look, whether I was in the industry or not, I would never have bought into the idea that when the pandemic hit and shut down theaters, that this business would never return. I don't know how people made that leap. I think some people thought it was inevitably going to happen, and that, as we all say, accelerated that inevitability, but it most certainly did not. But I mean, there were some dark days there, Mike, no question.
Well, I think the biggest thing, Paul, is that, the naysayers discounted how important that communal experience really is. And they went straight to, look, if I can sit on my couch and I have my 75, inch television, I have my sound system, I don't have some guy chomping popcorn next to me, it's a better experience. But it's really not.
It's not. And, I could look at Picasso, Rembrandt, the collected works of Rodin on my computer. But it's just, you have to go to a museum, man. You don't remember in Ferris Bueller where they're just staring up there in that museum of art, Ferris Bueller and his friends, and they're just staring at the art. And Cameron's face, they zoom in and he's just like mesmerized by the paintings. And to me, that's like the movie theater. And I think John Hughes kind of, maybe in a, kind of a very subtle way, pointed out how important that experience is. And that scene, if you ever have the chance to see Ferris Bueller, which I hope Joe Garrell is listening and puts it in Sinopolis handpicked, if they haven't already, I think you would see that movie experience within the movie would be even more impactful for us watching it in a theater.
Without a doubt. And the thing about the experience in the theater is, I've said this before, and that is, Paul, you and I could on a Saturday night, we could grill up a great steak. But there's something about trying to get into the best steakhouse in town that good luck getting in on a Friday or Saturday night. And everybody there could cook a steak at home. But there's something about the experience of going to the restaurant, and the movie theaters are no different.
It's really funny that you're saying that, because I went to Musso and Frank on Saturday night.
That's old school.
Could get in there. Old school. For those of you listening, it was as portrayed in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, other movies. I remember in the movie, I can't even talk. I'm so excited about Musso and Frank. In the movie Ed Wood, I think Ed Wood has a conversation with Orson Welles, as played by, I believe, Vincent D'Onofrio, and they're in a booth at Musso and Frank. But I can cook a great steak, But going to Musso and Frank and having one of their famous martinis, and this is not a paid promotion, by the way, for Musso and Frank. But I mean, I had a couple, well, maybe, a couple martinis, the ribeye, the waiters in the red jackets, and everyone there, the energy was incredible. So the communal experience is very relatable to the whole restaurant experience, concert experience, even cruise ship, dare I say, which I've never been on a cruise ship ever in my life. But even that has come back. And people thought that was a completely dead industry. But just the communal experiences in sporting events, are you kidding me? Why do people not time shift sporting events? Because you need to be there in the moment. And if you're at least not in the stadium, people watch sports live. Why? Because there's nothing like watching that unfold in real time. That's a bit different, but still the communal part of that. And I think it's also because when you're watching a sporting event live, everyone else around the world is watching it live. Watching a movie on streaming, you're insulated unless you're doing one of those group watch kind of situations. And it kind of reminds me, I think, Mike, the only time maybe the small screen was as impactful or at least had the cultural resonance of the movie theaters back when the final episode of MASH, the final episode of Dallas, when people would have appointment television. Yep. You have basically 3 channels. It was much more narrowcast and boutique-y, if that isn't going too far out on a limit. And if you think about it, the movie theater to me is like the coolest boutique ever, because compared to streaming, it's bespoke. You have to make an appointment. You have to find the tickets, the time, the show time you want to go to, either get in the car or find transportation, go to the movie theater. There's a buy-in of time and energy that adds to the eventization, if that's a word, of that experience. When you leave the theater, you're on a high. And also, Mike, the halo effect on other businesses is really profound.
Well,
and it's been proven, and it's pretty obvious, that that's the case, that the surrounding businesses, even ride-share services, public transportation, certainly restaurants, coffee shops, bars, bookstores, which are around, by the way. Anyway, but we've gotten on a whole tangent.
But you're not wrong on any of that, Paul. And the idea is that during the pandemic and when streaming, and again, you had HBO Max that was rolling out. You had Disney Plus that was in a huge customer acquisition period, Netflix that was defending its turf, Hulu, which is trying to expand. When you put all of those together with the fact that all the theaters were closing, you created kind of a perfect storm where the narrative of, well, these theaters are closing and they're not going to be reopening and people aren't interested in coming back to them. We've now switched to that. And it again is, I find it amusing when you see the typical ebbs and flows that happen in our industry. And, to get in a little of the kind of the weeds here, at the beginning of the summer, up until Barbie and Oppenheimer opened, the narrative was, wow, it's a bit of a soft summer. Things are underperforming, and I'm thinking to myself, well, you've never heard that before. That is wow, yeah. What a first. And then, of course, you and I had been saying from day one almost of this year that wait till we get to the second half of the summer, that the first half of 22 was loaded. And it was loaded with a lot of movies that had been pushed, movies that, Top Gun had was pushed a year. You had just a logjam of film in the first half of 22 that really stacked the deck. But we got to the first week of August last year and we had Bullet Train and nothing after that for the most part. That's was right.
And this year we have a ton of films well, not a ton, but 6, 7 wide releases. And look at how the Meg 2, The Trench, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles did.
Well, we had what was it? We had 4 movies that did over 25 million. We haven't had that since 2018. You're looking at, we had a record box office weekend, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, over $300 million of box. I'm sorry, that was the opening weekend of Barbie. Right. But then we had the biggest first weekend August ever the following week. And then this weekend we had I'm sorry, let's start that again. I've got my stats all wrong. Thaddeus, editing. So when you look back at it though, Paul, we had the biggest last week of July ever 2 weeks ago. This week
and we had the second biggest July ever, by the way, domestically ever.
Yeah. And then this weekend was the third biggest, first weekend of August on record. So you start looking at it, and again, the ebbs and flows of the way it works. And of course, everybody goes, well, that's because of Barbie and Oppenheimer. Well, every, summer you're going to say it was because of Top Gun,
right,
or it was because of Jurassic Park, or it was because of Star Wars. Like there's always that movie you're going to look at and say, well, it was because of that movie. That's just the way our business works.
It is. And it's a cumulative thing. Look at Sound of Freedom. And if you take just Sound of Freedom with the 160 odd domestic million, and then just the Meg 2 and Ninja Turtles right there. Look at through this weekend, Mike. And remember at the beginning of the summer, we were going out there saying, $4 billion summer. That's the benchmark. Can we get there? People were laughing at me, Mike. And I had this in print in multiple places. And through this weekend, 3.4 billion. We have 4 weekends left to go, including Labor Day weekend, which will have the Equalizer 3. And at 3.4 billion, I think a lot of people thought we wouldn't even get to that level. And yes, Barbie and Oppenheimer contributed together a big chunk of that, but so did all these other movies. And even though people said, well, The Flash didn't do as well as expected, Indiana Jones and Elemental, let's give a little shout out for that little engine that could, $423 million worldwide, had as small drops week after week as Barbie and Oppenheimer, if you go look at the numbers until the last week where they dropped off a ton of theaters. But we can't pronounce that a movie's a bomb on the opening weekend. It's just the story isn't told in 3 days. And all these movies collectively are contributing to this box office. Now, yes, if we eliminated Barbie and Oppenheimer from this world, which would be a terrible thing, or from the box office world, I should say, and from these numbers, we'd be looking at a different story, but it doesn't matter. That's the situation.
But that's the movie business, because you're always going to have, the ebbs and flows, as we talk about, of the.
What do you call it, Mike? The movie gods?
The movie gods. They're it's you're in the hands of the movie gods. Now, turning to where we are, Paul, I think if there were no work stoppages right now, we would probably be looking at the $10 billion year.
I know. Yeah,
I don't now, unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to go that. This is where at the top of the podcast, we kind of said, it's a tale of two cities, and we're starting to see the storm clouds gathering, for the fall and into the holiday season.
And we have to mention it, Mike, right? Well, you and I are very positive, very, optimistic, but we have to be realistic too. And just to tell you where we're at right now, according to our Comscore numbers for Jan 1 through August 6, domestic box office up 23% versus 22. International box office up 29% versus last year. And global box office, Mike, according to our Comscore data, is up 27%. I don't know that those numbers are going to hold. Like you said, these are major challenges. I think, though, that if one huge movie were to be moved out, and I don't know, I don't want to get into any speculation about, I know that a couple of movies have ostensibly, or some people are presuming, moved because of the inability to fully market them because of the lack of star participation. But it's definitely going to hurt if more studios get cold feet, worry that may happen, because these movies are all done, Mike. I presume they're at least all in the can. If not, they're in post-production, which the acting and writing doesn't necessarily come into play. Although if you need to do pickup shots or ADR,
well, there is that. The biggest issue is that the actors are not allowed to promote the films. And as we saw with Barbie and with Oppenheimer, the cast promotion was key to the success of those films.
Huge.
So
absolutely.
I can completely understand the studio hesitation of going forward and spending all of the P&A and risking the IP if they can't properly market the movies. That being said, as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, for any of the genre movies that are out there that are not necessarily cast reliant, there's a big opportunity because clearly America is in love with the cinema again and wants to go. And these films will find an opportunity because.
And Gran Turismo, Mike, aren't they doing like a rollout to put the marketing in the hands of the people?
They have a really interesting rollout plan where basically they're sneaking just about every weekend leading up to release, starting this weekend, I believe. And
Mike, they wouldn't have done that without this strike, right? I mean, that is borne out.
I think a little.
Can we surmise
a little bit? But I also think they saw an opportunity, and the opportunity being with movies moving out, opening up a little space for them. They realize they have a movie that delivers, and the more people they can get to see it before with a soft opening before the real opening, so to speak. I think that will position the movie to do really well. They would not be doing this if they didn't have the goods, is what it comes down to.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there are marketing materials, videos, and other types of things for the August movies that were probably created involving the talent, the acting talent, before the strike hit, I assume.
Yeah.
And these August movies, I mean, Denzel Washington obviously is a huge star, but some of these other films are going to rely more on the marketing message, sans the star participation that can't happen right now. But when we get into the holiday season, I think it's going to be a lot bigger.
Well, I think when we get to mid-October is when you're really going to start to feel it. And, we haven't seen any of the major holiday movies pick up and move yet. But I'm sure they're keeping a close eye on it. And I'm sure there's a lot of debate going on in the walls of all the studios, and everyone's got their.
And by the way, Mike, you worked at a studio for a very long time. How monumental are those discussions for these companies?
It's huge
from that perspective.
It's huge
from the inside the studio perspective.
So remember, when you're moving a film, it's not just like I'm picking the calendar and going, okay, we're going from this date to that date. Can we move the media? Has my media flight started? What is the availability of my talent when I go to the new date? Are they in production on something else? Do I actually have the ability to utilize them the way I'd like to utilize them? What is available from a PR standpoint? Am I competing with other films for magazine covers and talk show? I mean, there is such a huge monumental change when you decide you're going to move a film from one date to another. And, there's no guarantees that when you get to that new date, things are going to be better for you than they are now. So those discussions for the fall are happening at every studio with a movie that's on one of those dates. And there are no easy answers for any of those people. And, the secondary piece of it is for the theater owners. They're really at kind of the beck and call of what happens with the studios. So, they've been having they all came out and said they had a record July. It's been a great summer for them, but they're looking ahead the same way everybody else is looking ahead. Like, we need to make sure we have content coming into our theaters because that's what drives people to buy tickets.
And those are the kind of insights you can only get on Ticket to Ride, because Mike has worked at studios, he's worked in exhibitions, so you get a lot of great insights there. I think too, it's like for me, and I'm a car guy, having the writers and actors out is like having, like you and I own a racetrack, meaning the theater, and there are no cars and no drivers available because they're on strike. It's just
it's tough.
It's like, what do you do?
It's tough. Well,
it's really tough. And I understand the strike. I'm not making an editorial judgment. That has to be worked out between the parties. If you look at Barbie and Oppenheimer, look at how things happen when everyone's working in sync. That worked very well.
Well, I wanted to go back to one other thing before we wrap up, Paul, and that was something you had brought up where you had said, we were at this, we had passed $6 billion for the year. Everybody looks at the benchmark of 2019 because that was the last pandemic year and where we are. And we're slightly behind 2019 in box office. And again, the naysayers will say, well, you're never going to get back to those levels. But what they're also forgetting is the number of wide releases. And again, we're about 18% behind in the number of wide releases. And again, for the purpose of, what we say here, we're talking about films that get released in 2,000 locations or more.
That's right.
So
That's
to
right.
be 18% behind and to be about 19% behind in box, I think is where it is, somewhere that going into last weekend. It again, it's about the content, and looking ahead at what we just talked about, it's all relative. The number of films in the marketplace are going to determine where we are from a box office standpoint. And right now it looks like it could be a bumpy road as we get into the fourth quarter.
Mike, when you say that, I think of the strikes, and then everyone's talking about like if actors can't promote the movies, but what about you got to have movies to promote?
Well,
and you have to have actors to act in them, and it's like it's just devastating.
Well, the other thing too is unfortunately,
profound.
Unfortunately, I'm going to kind of cast another dark shadow a little bit, and that is looking ahead 12 to 24 months from now. As this strike progresses, and that means there are films that are not being made right now, we're going to kind of be in the same situation, or we could be in the same situation we were in a year ago, where all of a sudden we don't have the films to be in the marketplace.
And what was it, Mike? We were down 41 wide releases in 22 versus 2019.
And unfortunately, 24 and 25, we may be looking at 22 as the barometer of, what that looks like, which is not something the industry would like to look at.
Well, we've seen from all these, and we're going to wrap up here in a minute, but we've seen that the industry has taken every challenge and come out a winner. But this is another very tough test. No question about it, because this is not really it's not a pandemic thing. It's a work thing. And it's about equitable, coming to an equitable meeting of the minds for those on both sides of these issues. So, and again, theaters are doing everything right, but they are, in a sense, at the mercy of the production schedule.
Well, I think,
and the product pipeline, or the movies pipeline.
The movie pipeline. And I think ultimately what this exercise over the last, 18 months has shown this industry is it's very resilient. It's not going anywhere. It's changing. It's not the same industry it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago. But when you think about it, what industry is,
right.
It's evolving as it goes along. It's adapting to the world. We've talked about it before. The stay hard windows of, it's got to be 90 days is, that's no longer an issue. The exhibitors and the studios are very flexible when it comes to when a movie should hit the streaming platform. There is no set in stone dates, which is great. So when a movie runs out of steam theatrically, it's when it can move on to its next window.
And all that stuff is good, Mike. Everything you said. And the key word, I think you said adaptation happens in nature. It happens. It's happening in our business. And every challenge that has come along has, in the end, most of the time, made things ultimately better. But it's definitely difficult to live through these times. As you always say, we're on a sugar high right now, but definitely those, the strikes are out there.
Well, you know what? I'm going to disagree with it. I don't think this one's a sugar high. I think last year was a bit of a sugar high. I think this is more of a natural kind of ebb and flow. I keep using that, but no. But I think it's
sugar high.
I think it's.
Barbenheimer.
Well, no. But I think it's
a sugar.
It is a bit of an artificial high but I think my point being is last summer was a real sugar high, because again, it was a lot of film that had been backlogged. So it was artificially week after week where you had one title that was a big title. This summer was more of a typical summer. The Barbenheimer was a phenomenon that kind of was culturally started organically. But the key thing here was both movies delivered, and both movies, received A cinema scores. Both movies have had repeat business. It is less of a gimmick and more of a content-driven piece of the back end of the summer, as we all we're looking at like it would be. So I guess my point, Paul, is this summer is more typical of how a summer might work in its patterns.
I agree and I disagree. I think the Barbenheimer thing was not typical, but I get what you're saying. This is definitely a different world right now.
Well, I'll agree with that. It wasn't typical, But it was, when I say a typical summer, meaning we have those surprises that show up on a regular basis. You can go back over the course of time and go, I didn't know the Blair Witch Project was going to go out and do $140 million. No one saw that coming.
Mike, it's your movie gods again coming into play. They're looking at us. We're little puppets down here.
And to wrap it all up, I guess what it really says is the resiliency of this industry, and the fact is people love going to the movies. They've been loving going to the movies for over 100 years, and there is no indication that they plan on stopping anytime soon.
And that's the bottom line. No matter what's going on in the industry, all these challenges, at least we know when all this gets resolved that the audience is waiting.
Well, and that is exactly right. And, when you start, if things end up getting a little bumpy in the fall and we start reading again about the demise of the movie theater industry, we can just point back to when this gets resolved, guess what? People are going to be coming back. So
exactly. And that's why you are listening, dear listeners, to Ticket to Ride with Mike Polydorus, president of Paper Air Media, a huge conglomerate on the Mount Rushmore of companies. And Paul DeGarrian, I am the senior media analyst for Comscore, another company on the Mount Rushmore of companies. And we're really happy to bring this bi-weekly podcast to you. And thanks again to Screendollars and Thaddeus Bouchard and their team over there for editing and making us sound brilliant. Right, Mike?
They can't make me sound brilliant, but you do a good job on your own, Paul. You do not need any help. I need all the help I can get.
We're in this together.
Looking forward to seeing how the rest of the summer plays out.
We shall be watching it here on Ticket to Ride. I'll see you, and you'll be hearing us in about 2 weeks from now. Thanks for listening.
Take care, Paul.
Bye, Mike.
She's got a ticket to ride, and she don't care.